Entry to the European Union can be painstaking. To clear all the hurdles, it can last years, sometimes decades. Just ask Serbia or Turkey. But what about once you're in? The new year began with a new constitution in Hungary, whose prime minister, a 48-year-old Oxford-educated lawyer, started his career as a center-right pro-European. But today, with new powers, he can curtail the powers of the Constitutional Court, stack the central bank with political appointments, and blame the opposition socialists for all the ills of the communist era. Tens of thousands turned out in Budapest last week to denounce reforms that also include jailing the homeless, a flat 16.5% income tax for all, and most importantly, the silencing of dissenting media. It could all come to a head very soon. The IMF and EU have cut purse strings over the changing of the guard at the central bank. The PM says that's political rather than professional. And after all, Viktor Orbán did win the 2010 elections fair and square. In fact, he enjoys a two-thirds majority in parliament. So how out of line really is Budapest? Does this, as some have claimed, have the potential to pose an existential threat to Europe on par with the euro crisis? And why has the response in Brussels been surprisingly muted? Today in the France 24 debate, the problem with Hungary, and joining us from Brussels, György Schöpflin, MEP for the ruling Fidesz party. Thank you for being with us. Also with us from Budapest, György Bulgar, journalist with Club Radio, a radio station that's scheduled to be shut down by March. Thank you for being with us. Joining me here.
Good evening.
Joining me here in the studio, France 24 European Affairs editor Christophe Robit, and also in Brussels, by the way, Austrian member of the European Parliament Ulrike Lunacek of the Green Party. Thank you for being with us. And before we go on to our panel, let's go to Budapest and a look at Gulliver Craig's France 24 report on the country's credit rating being downgraded to junk status.
The hole in this flag is where Soviet symbols were cut out during Hungary's 1956 uprising. It represents freedom and democracy. But is the parliament behind it still fully democratic? The governing party has changed the rules here and also increased its control over the media, cultural institutions, courts, and the National Bank. Laszlo Reich is among a number of veterans of the fight against communism in the 1980s who are now raising the alarm again. They wrote an open letter detailing the various democratic checks and balances the government has lately removed.
This is the first case that a member state tends to slip over or to slip down from the democratic way of the European Union. Therefore, I think it's as important for the Union or for the member states of the Union as for the Hungarians.
The European Union and the United States have expressed concern about Viktor Orbán's government, repeating it after a mass rally in Budapest drew attention to the situation last week.
That was the first time, the 2nd of January, when NGOs and democratic opposition parties were organizing together the demonstration. Now we need to move on and find new ways, and one new possibility is the opposition roundtable to discuss about the new programs.
Faced with this groundswell of opposition at home and abroad, Hungary's communications minister Zoltán Kovács has been fielding a constant stream of journalists and doing his best to shrug off the problem.
Really, I mean, it's a ridiculous and absurd accusation that the country is taking any kind of authoritarian turn.
Yet the concerns are already hurting Hungary. The currency plummeted after the IMF and EU broke off talks on helping Budapest because of their fears for the central bank's independence.
You can really notice it in the household. It's meant prices have really risen a lot for food, for clothing.
Look, just today we have lost 20 forints compared to the euro.
Traders are also jittery. To them, what the government calls an unorthodox economic policy often looks like sheer incompetence.
They didn't really calculate the international reaction. They didn't take it that seriously. And now the markets are telling them that it's not good.
Hungary now says it is prepared to compromise with the IMF and the EU in order to secure assistance. If no deal is reached, it could be bankruptcy sooner than protest, that stops Viktor Orban in his tracks.
And France 24's Gulliver Cragg joins us from Budapest. Gulliver, you say in that report that the government was caught off guard by the international reaction. How do ordinary citizens feel about the negotiations that are starting up this week at IMF headquarters in Washington?
Well, one thing's for certain, and that is that the economy is most Hungarians' number one worry at the moment, more even than this question of backsliding on democracy. And the falling forint in particular is hitting Hungarian households hard, as you saw that lady in my report talking about the increasing prices for household goods. But also what's even worse for a lot of Hungarian households is that millions of them hold debts denominated in foreign currencies, in Swiss francs and in euros. So with the national Hungarian currency falling as a result of this lack of investor confidence in the currency in the country, that is hitting their pocketbooks extremely hard. So I think Hungarians are hoping that these negotiations with the IMF will be successful. They've seen that even since Friday, when the government said it was now prepared to compromise on this law governing the National Bank in particular, the currency has stabilized somewhat. There's a chance that confidence is coming back a little bit. So Hungarians realize that this credit line really is needed, I think. That said, it's true that about a year and a half ago, Viktor Orban won plaudits for telling the IMF where to get off, basically saying that Hungary did not want to abide by the IMF's conditions and that it would pursue a different sort of policy to try and get through the crisis, which involved raising large crisis tax on banks and on large companies, particularly foreign companies. But I think that time has shown that that policy really has not worked very well, and Hungarians realise that. And although some of them might be disappointed and some of them might be a little bit hurt in their national pride, at the end of the day, the bottom line is the bottom line.
All right, and we thank you for that. Gulliver Cragg, who's following the developing the story out of Hungary closely for us. Thank you for being with us. I want to, if possible, first go to Georgi Bulgar in Budapest right now. When you hear that the government is prepared to compromise, what's your reaction?
Well, I don't know that, because Mr. Orban has always had a very special kind of double speak. With one sentence he says this, and with the following one, he says something other. Nobody knows what he has in mind, whether he will let the IMF talks go on and we would accept a standby credit line provided by the IMF or not. We try to stick to our rules, which are independent of what the IMF or the European Union has in mind.
All right. I don't know if we're having sound issues with Brussels trying to get through to Georgi Shopflin for a reaction to that, but we'll go to him as soon as we can. Christophe Rabit, what they're we do have Brussels, I'm told.
Go ahead.
We'll get to you in a minute, Christophe. Georgi Shopflin, first of all, when the government says it's prepared to compromise, is it solely on the issues of the economic reforms that have been passed, the central bank, or does it extend beyond just simply the economic realm to the issues that we've been talking about, most notably the shutting down of radio stations and the like?
Well, I only heard a part of the discussion. The technology is imperfect. No radio station is being shut down, but Club Radio, the one we're talking about, is not having its frequency renewed because it simply didn't obey the proper procedures when it put in its application. It would have actually been flouting the law if that frequency had been renewed. So let's start with getting realities into the story first. I think your entire introduction was heavily biased in one direction. I think the program itself is stacked. That's to say you've got two people on the anti-Hungarian side, anti-Hungarian government side, and myself. I only caught glimpses of this report which you put through. That seemed to me to be putting only one side of the story. Now, the Hungarian reality is actually very different, but that hardly ever gets heard, and I'm delighted to be here to make my voice heard. It seems to me that, to answer your question directly, just as happened with the media law a year ago, if the European Union, the Commission, is ready and capable of giving concrete detail of where Hungarian provisions, whether it's the constitution or any other law, is actually in contradiction, in contravention of EU regulations, I'm quite certain the government will amend it, or amend them as the case may be. What I find bizarre is that the constitution has been known for 9 months, and suddenly, out of nothing, merely because it has to come on stream, came into effect on the 1st of January, suddenly everybody is seized by a kind of collective groupthink and says, what a terrible constitution. I think most of the people who have commented on it, certainly what I've read, have never read it. It's a long and complicated document. I have actually read it, and I think most people who would read it would actually recognize there's no real problem with it. It's pretty much square and square, a mainstream European document, a European constitution, and it's not a kind of horrible torture chamber as its opponents like to make out. And I wish that some reality would be introduced into this debate, which recognized, and that is the problem that I have with the European left, that the other side actually should have a voice. If you are concerned with the principles of democracy, then I think it's essential that every voice should be heard. And at this particular time, the voice of the Hungarian government is not being heard.
All right, let's go back to the top and the point you made about, first of all, Club Radio. What are the laws they were flouting?
It's a fairly complicated legal procedure. I don't actually think anyone's going to be very interested in the detail, but basically they had to put in an application in a particular form. They'd failed to do this. There was no way that the Media Council could actually have accepted it on those terms.
And there's no wiggle room possible?
I'm sure there is. If Club Radio is prepared to put in the application in its proper form, for all I know, it may be possible to appeal on this. My sense of it, and this is certainly being suggested by the other side, that's to say my side in the debate, that Club Radio did this deliberately. It was a provocation.
Georgi Bulgar, your reaction to that?
No, they'll deny it. Don't worry, they'll deny it. But I think that that is certainly being bruited about.
Because
that's
Club
exactly what
Radio
you're saying.
has used
Don't
this
be
frequency
ridiculous.
as a talk and news radio for more than 10 years. The Media Authority, which consists of only Fidesz party loyalists, have tried to renew our frequency license by transforming the frequency from a talk and news radio to a music radio. So we had to apply to regain this frequency as a music radio, and we tried to adjust to that requirement and said that we are willing to broadcast 40% of our program in music. By now, we do it 10 to 15%. So all the other is talk and news. So the government tried to strip off our frequency, saying that there should be other music radio stations in Budapest and no more talk radios. And by the way, we are the only talk and news radio station in Budapest, which is independent, which is critical of the government, which might be called opposition. But we are out of the air from February or March because of the government that wants to change this frequency, this radio, into a music radio station.
Let me get the reaction. Let me bring in Ulrika Lunacek on this. What's your reaction while viewing all of this?
Well, pardon me. Hello and good evening, and thanks for inviting me to that debate. Well, I think there are several levels that we have to take into account. When Mr. Schöpflin just now said that the voice of the Hungarian government isn't heard and there hasn't been any they are not being consulted, their voice is not being heard, I simply have to say if a government has a 2/3 majority in a parliament, and therefore in the government, then it is very important to be very sensitive to involve the public, to involve opposition in the parliament on that. And if you say that the constitution has, it has been known for 9 months, you know, would you say, and you are, Mr. Schöpflin, you are a political scientist. You have written books about autocratic regimes, which then were behind the Iron Curtain, sort of the ones under Soviet authority at that time. But do you really think it is right if the opposition in a parliament will not have any chance anymore to look at amendments to laws, which can be done like 1 hour before, if the new laws can be done within 24 hours in a parliament? I've been an oppositional parliamentarian in my home country in Austria for 10 years, and I know how sometimes governments try to push laws through. This simply is undemocratic. This is not democratic standards. That's one thing. And this is why I have been criticizing not Hungary, let me make that very clear. It's not about the country, it's about the government and the way it is installing step by step at all the relevant institutions which should be there for checks and balances in a democratic system, an authoritarian and autocratic state. And that I don't understand by people who come from the European People's Party, like you, Mr. Schöpflin, who have been criticizing autocratic regimes for so long that you simply don't see what is happening in that context there in Hungary. And that I find extremely problematic over the last year. The media law has already been mentioned. Mrs. Salai, who is the head of the media authority and the new head of the Justice Authority, who, by the way, is the wife of until now head of the delegation of Fidesz here in the European Parliament, who has the authority to allocate cases and to nominate judges. So the independence of the judiciary, the independence of the media, opposition work in a parliament, all that is being done away with the laws that have been installed by the Orban government. And that is heavy criticism, and that's why we, together with many others, think a procedure for invoking an Article 7 procedure, which, because of violation of fundamental European values, is necessary in order to these laws go away and to install again freedom of the media and all of that.
We'll pick up on those points after the break. Just very briefly before we go, Christoph Robit, Georgi Schöpflin, when he says, why are people suddenly waking up to this constitution? The reform had been in the works a long time. Does he have a point?
I think he has a point. If we remember, 1 year ago, Hungary was at the helm of the rotating presidency of the EU. Already at the time, I think, at the level of the European Parliament, many MEPs had voiced concern about what they view as an autocratic reshuffling of Hungary. Why suddenly now? I think because it's not only about the EU and Hungary, it's also about the IMF and Hungary. We know that...
it's all coming ahead at the same time.
It's all coming ahead at the same time, absolutely.
When we come back, we're going to pick up on those points. Stay with us. You're watching the France 24 debate.